Hello, I'm Stefano.
Hello.
I'm from Rome. Welcome. All right. And now we have Bill Travis and Sophia Wallace with us. Okay.
Thank you, Stefano. Stefano Abadesa Mercanti is the founder of VA Culture, which runs a series of lectures on the arts, philosophy, history, and literature. My name is Bill Travis, and I'm a photo-based artist. One of the unusual things about this series is that it consists of one photographer interviewing another. This is the second in a series of 4 interviews with some of the most creative photographers working today. Our focus is on women who are reinventing American photography. Please join us again for the next 2 Saturdays at 11 a.m. Eastern time, which would be 5 p.m. in Rome, if you're lucky enough to be in Italy.
Purely on your body.
We have an international audience. Today, it is my great pleasure to introduce Sophia Wallace. Sophia has demonstrated a sustained and deep involvement with issues around gender, especially with regard to the gendered nature of aesthetics and the connection between beauty and objectification. A mixed media artist, Sophia holds a BA in political science from Smith College and an MA in photography from New York University and the International Center of Photography. Best known for her viral project, Cliteracy, Sophia is interested in ways that people assigned female at birth are denied self-determination. Her TED Talk has been viewed 725,000 times, while her collaboration with Huffington Post, the Overdue Undertold Story of the Clitoris, received 3.5 million views and has been translated into 3 languages. We'll be focusing today on her series On Beauty, where she photographed male models using conventions typically associated with the depiction of women. What happens when the stereotypical role of the male is destabilized? How can photography be weaponized? Hi, Sophia.
Hi.
Okay, there we go. Before we get started with this interview, Sophia has a short video to share with us, which is going to help us get into the project called the video is called Just a Pretty Face.
It's 3 minutes and 30 seconds. It starts out a little slow, but it does get going, and it's only 3 minutes, just to give you guys a heads up. Bill, are you hearing the audio? I'm not hearing anything coming through.
I don't hear audio.
Yeah, there's audio with it.
What does it feel like as a male model to stand in for the idealized man? What's it like to walk into a room full of strangers and have to take off your clothes? Do you like being looked at? What's the experience like of having to make yourself appear available to both men and women? Have you ever lost a job because someone wasn't attracted to you? What do you think is the effect on men of having to present this hypermasculine exterior? Has anyone ever crossed the line with you on a job? Do you think there's a relationship between violence and the expectations of masculinity? What does it mean to be a man? Do you feel pressure to be strong all the time? What was it like for you being posed the way I posed you? Did you ever feel that your body was not safe? Do you think that perceptions of race affect the way that your body is used in photography? How many times have you been on a shoot and the photographer has tried to sleep with you? How do you feel if someone says that you're effeminate? Have you ever seen your dad cry? Have you ever felt more vulnerable because of your beauty?
Thank you. That was beautiful, very suggestive. Really turns things around. I think a lot of the history of Western art is written in terms of the male gaze, and you're certainly turning that around. So I have a number of questions that I wanted to ask you, and when we're done, we'll open it up to the participants, and we want to get a lively question and answer going. But we'll start with this dialogue at the beginning. So as I mentioned, the series we're going to be focusing on is called On Beauty. So let's start by asking, how do you define beauty? What is beauty for you?
Am I sharing now, guys?
Yes.
Did we do it?
Perfect.
Okay, great. So when I think about the question of beauty, on the surface, it's this, you know, this aesthetic of something that's elegant and graceful and pleasurable to look at. But I think it can also be softness and vulnerability, tenderness, fragility, and then it can also be, you know, the beautiful flaws that we have. But I think that this question of like, what is the beautiful, the more that one thinks about it and looks at it, the more it becomes something that is not neutral at all, not simple at all, and perhaps has its own agenda.
Interesting to use the word agenda. Let's go to the next picture.
Oh, I realize I need to admit people to the room now that I'm the host. Okay, how do I do this? Sorry, I don't know how to get back to my navigation. There we go. Okay, there we go. Sorry. Can you remember the question, Bill?
You ended the last one talking about beauty by saying that there's an agenda attached to it in some way. And that reminds me of an interview you did for Arte in Europe, where you were talking about the way that beauty implies desire and that desire involves a power dynamic. And I'm wondering if you can dig into that for us and show how that complicated way of dealing with beauty and power is manifested in your work.
Yes, it's interesting because, you know, you've been asking me these questions in our conversations leading up to this about it being personal. And the more that I have been thinking about your questions, Bill, the more that I have like layered answers beyond what I normally say about this. So I think, you know, when one from a young age, and I think particularly people who are gendered female at birth or are feminized, there's a lot of pressure to be good, to be pretty, to make people look good, to not behave badly. Like one of the most important things that you can do is appear in the appropriate way and behave in the appropriate way. And so putting that weight onto women, if I wanted to talk about that, I couldn't use female bodies because it's so invisibilized. I wanted to use other bodies to show the power dynamic, to show the imposition of this construct onto a male gendered body, and see then what that looks like. Oh, thank you for removing that little box. And so when I talk about power, I'm talking about, you know, what is the relationship of the photographer to the subject, or the artist to the subject? I mean, in the history of art and the history of portraiture, you know, most often it has been affluent, heterosexual white men, and they've gotten to choose their muse and their subjects, and they've had, you know, ultimate control in how those subjects were represented. And so part of my question was just, you know, what is my gaze, and what would happen if I use this power to talk about the construct of femininity, but this time I do this on male bodies, and I force them into certain poses where they have to be off balance, where they have to kind of anticipate the gaze and welcome it. They kind of have to appear like passive and receptive, as if they want to be looked at, but they're not threatening. They're not kind of staring you down. They're looking at you like, yes, my body is here for you to assess and perhaps desire. It's available. And so that's a little bit about what I mean when I talk about like the power dynamic and the objecthood of it.
Yes, and Stefano is also the host now. Or just a technical question. Yes, well, you are using photography in an interesting way because for many reasons, but it seems that as has come out in conversations we've had also, just the two of us, that photography is a means to an end. And so it's expressing this idea which is really taking precedence over the photographic work itself. It's like a research and investigation into society and gender, very, very large issues. And maybe a writer would come out with a novel, and a scholar maybe with an essay, and you're coming out with these photographs which invite us to reflect on these very large issues.
Can we go to the next slide? Because Bill, I don't think
let's go to the next. Who's showing?
I thought it was me, but I can't control my.
Stefano, can Sophia show her next slide? Because we have a few technical snafus, but...
Okay, I don't have a photo.
Puoi fare due host allo stesso tempo? Oh, okay.
Okay, now I have control. Great. Okay.
Oh, good. Okay, you know, the vocabulary you're using is very interesting. Forced, direction, controlling, and all the things that we typically associate with, you know, the male ethos, if you want. But I want to move on to the whole notion of beauty once again and ask you about the title of this series, because you indicated that the title of this body of work we're looking at is On Beauty. And so that just raises a question in my mind. Why do you call it On Beauty as opposed to just Beauty or Beautiful Boy or some other title? Can you explain that?
Yeah, when I first started the project, the title was The Beauty of Masculinity, and I was really trying to isolate all of the soft, gentle, sweet, receptive aspects that are sort of innate and inherent within masculinity of every sexual preference, but are just kind of repressed in our visual representations of it. But then as I thought about it more, I wanted to get beyond the sort of gender binary and just say about beauty in general, because the subject of beauty itself and how it's, once we start thinking about beauty, unfortunately, all of these things like gender and race and, you know, ability and body and all of these things become projected immediately onto it. So I wanted to kind of open it up into this bigger philosophical question of like, what is beauty?
Yes, interesting philosophical question. To me, on beauty, I know you've also referenced Zadie Smith with the title of her book, and you're taking that, but you're picking it apart at the same time. But to me, On Beauty sounds almost like an 18th century title, the way a writer, a philosopher in the at that time would have written a treatise. And so that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where your work functions, well, I guess in a way, it's kind of like a bilingual thing you're doing, because on the one level, it's photography, and on the other level, it's a treatise on an idea. And so I just think it's really interesting the way titles can help define an aim. There's a power in words. Well, we're moving ahead with the images, and I wonder if you could talk about your inspiration for the series.
Yes. So when I started to think about this work, I've added a few slides, Bill, just so you know, so we're not running out. But when I started to think about this work, I had been doing a lot of work in my photographic practice looking at gender. I was looking at masculinity in people born identified female at birth. I was looking at androgyny, and I was aestheticizing butchness. And it just made sense to look at femininity within the construct of the male body. And I wanted to try to show somehow the harm and the construct of trying to live in this idea of acceptable feminine performance all the time, like how incredibly difficult it is, how as much as it can be, you know, true and joyful, it also is exhausting and tiring and a burden, and it's not real, it's a construct. And being forced to be you know, a stereotype of oneself or a fictitious idea is just really exhausting. And so I was like, how do I show this? And I thought it'd be really interesting to try to show this harm on the male body. And the reason I use the word harm is because once you take away the things that make a man in terms of, you know, like if you think about the expression like man up, right? You know, strength, power, dominance, assertiveness, confidence, leadership. And you put a man, suddenly he's off balance, suddenly he's, you know, he's looking over his shoulder to the side and he's a little bit maybe doubtful or unsure, or you aestheticize him looking not confident, then this becomes what kind of man is he? He's a different kind of man. And who is he for? Who does he belong to? So it was a very interesting set of questions I was asking, but it was also really exciting to work on the territory of the heterosexual idealized male bodies, because these, you know, these models, like they're models, they're gorgeous, they have incredible bodies, beautiful features. I mean, they're so elegant. So in a way, they have to stand in for this ideal vision. So it's really interesting to see, like, if you take that ideal and then you sort of deconstruct it and force it to live within a feminine construct, like what happens to it?
Yes, well, that's a very, very big subject, and we're going to be probing into that as we move along. But one of the connections that comes to the fore here is the connection with fashion photography. And you seem to be using that and subverting it at the same time. Can you talk about how you did that and what the meaning of that would be for you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I had to do, you know, paid jobs basically immediately after, I mean, all through college, all through high school as well, but I couldn't do unpaid internships with amazing artists that I wanted to work with because I had to earn money. So I was always working in commercial settings of photography, and then later fashion photographers as an assistant and as a retoucher, and doing some digital capture as well. And so I had so much exposure every single day to the idealization of certain bodies and the lack of certain bodies and subjects in my visual space. And it was kind of overwhelming, this sort of assault of images every day that sort of says, this is what's life, this is what's ideal, this is what's normal, this is what you should want and what you should aspire to. And if it isn't here, maybe it's not real, or it's just not even important enough to show. So I think all of that, I really, you know, I used to have a blog, and I called it This Beautiful Fight. And I thought of my images as being these little art bombs that were sort of like inside of the Trojan horse of fashion, trying to, using fashion as a way to kind of be seen and be considered palatable or important, but their agenda was actually to invite viewers to take a feminist position and consider, you know, that gender is a construct, and maybe that all of us are a little bit more complex than what we're allowed to be, or the stories that we see in images.
Well, that's certainly a more complex reading of fashion than one usually hears. So it's interesting to go back to those conventions and then turn them on their head. You know, you have the element of beauty there, but then you also have all of that deep thinking about everything that lies underneath the surface. And, you know, you've been using words to characterize male experience or socialization, and things like strength and dominance and so forth. And so it becomes, I think, really interesting to ask how you take the pictures, physically, how you take the pictures. And I think it's really interesting how that works in to your general theme. I mean, there's a real connection between you know, the taking of the picture and then what you're aiming for. So could you help guide us through that?
Yeah, I'd be very happy to. So I have some images here that get into how I took them. Can you guys see the right side of the screen, even though it's like
I can. I assume the others are not. They're muted now, but yes.
Okay. So if you guys can see, this is, I had the opportunity to be filmed showing my process by this European program called Arte. And it was a really cool experience to be able to share it. And in this case, I wasn't, because I was showing the process, I didn't get to do a long casting with male models. So here I'm actually shooting my assistant, who's like very, very butch. He's like not, you know, and he is a little balding. He's not like the ideal male model at all. But I did the same process with him where I was on a ladder. I was directing my models to immediately like make their bodies smaller, put your arms close together, cover their chest as if their breasts and their nipples especially were inappropriate to be seen in public and needed to be hidden, that they needed to have some modesty, that they needed to close their legs and sit like a lady, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is just, this is what it looks like. This is like me directing and then, you know, looking at the Polaroids, showing the models, and just like the process, you know, which in a way, I mean, we're laughing here because it is kind of liberating. I feel like a lot of the subjects that I photographed, like they had never been, no one was posing them the way that I was posing them. And so there was something kind of, I don't know, special about that opportunity. And this is the final image from that moment. This is another one of the models that you saw earlier. Like this is one of the images from his casting. And this is kind of like how he goes through the world. But then you can see as we're shooting, I'm starting to like direct him, you know, first of all, no direct eye contact, get your arms down, looking away so that he can be properly looked at. This model, you know, covering himself as if his chest is somehow inappropriate, being sort of embarrassed to be seen, or having like the come hither lips that are available and open and like ready, or sort of inviting with the type of eye contact where like the head is down and the eyes are kind of gazing upward. And, you know, this is another subject that I'm just, you know, posing his body in these ways that are generally not, you know, not directed for male models, trying to show, you know, this, and I didn't want it to come across as drag. I really wanted it to feel like that true beauty that's there, that like when someone wakes up in the morning and their arms are over their head and they just like softly open their eyes and they're completely like their guard is down, they're completely relaxed and at ease. Like what is that innate softness that they have to hide, that they have to armor themselves for every day when they go into the world? And so that was, you know, that was like what I was trying to bring out. And it really took a while for a lot of the subjects. And some of them it was like much easier, but many of them, it was a long process of like directing them until the point that they started to let themselves be seen in this way.
Well, I understand you were working on the project for approximately a year, and back in about 2010. And so how many images came out of this project?
Yeah, so it was really interesting to go through my files because initially I thought, oh gosh, you know, 500 images. But of course, as I look back through my records, it turned out to be more like 3,000 images and, you know, 4 different photo shoots, multiple castings, and then 2 different video shoots, as well as like all of the research that went into it, just for a final grouping of like 11 final portraits.
Like getting into Harvard.
Totally.
3,000 apply and 11 get in.
Yeah.
Yes. So now, how do you find your models?
So it was a combination of creating casting calls and then a few people that I knew. One person that I found in this delicious bakery that had the most incredible cookies. He was absolutely unbelievably gorgeous. The model with the red curly hair. So that I found him in a cookie shop, but mostly casting calls for models. Can you tell us about Azim? Yes, so Azim is one of the models who is a friend of mine, and his portrait is very special to me. So this is him in the middle, and he's an incredible artist. And I was extremely inspired by him and wanting him to participate in this project with me because he had done this whole project in Berlin where he took a photograph of him and his mother, and I actually have it up on my wall here. That's it. So he turned that photograph into, if you guys can see my screen, I don't know if you can, I'll show you afterwards, but he turned that into a stencil and he spray painted all over Berlin. So that's the face that you see in red. And I was just really moved that he would use this image of his mother and this very gendered image of her with a hijab, which has so much political, you know, drama around it. He would use it as his tag, as his name. And I was just very moved by that. So I asked him if he would participate. And, you know, he immediately started asking me lots of smart questions like, well, there's many different types of headscarves, like what style, Arabic style, modern, conservative, the burqa from Afghanistan, for Iranians who don't want to wear a scarf but have to, and how they style it, and like many other nuances that I hadn't thought about. He was like very generous to sort of share with me as a Westerner who like just projected, you know, my simplistic Western analysis. So we talked a lot about the meaning of this, this signifier and how it's placed on the body, and how women also can intervene even in, you know, the regulation being forced to wear this to express how, you know, their positionality. And so Azine also told me an amazing story about Majid Tavakoli, who's the person here in this image. He's a student activist, and he gave a very powerful speech in front of 1,500 students, and he was immediately arrested by the government and beaten really viciously and imprisoned. And then the state media put photographs of him up and argued that he had he tried to escape from the protest supposedly wearing women's clothes. And it was an attempt to completely discredit this activist and use women as the scapegoat basically, and gender to sort of weaponize femininity against him and sort of just discredit him. In response, and you can just see the way, I mean, this is him, and then you can see what happens to, you know, his subjectivity, his individuality, the way that, you know, the images that the state-run media allowed to be shown, where he's only looking down and he's, you know, and clearly just in a lot of, you know, he's gone through who knows what in that situation. And this is an image that I just want to share that's from 1979 of the Iranian women's movement protesting against the forced hijab. So just this idea that wearing the hijab is that everyone accepts it, or that it's, you know, that the fight is somehow new. Like, women have been protesting for a very long time in Iran. So there's also the significance of like, not only are women, you know, being forced to wear a separate type of clothing, but they are legally forced, and they've been fighting against that. And they didn't, at different points in time, that wasn't the legal law of the land. And so there was an incredible outcry from activists, and male activists said, we are all Majid, and they all put on headscarves, and they said, you know, you can't use the brave women of Iran against us, and there's nothing shameful about being a woman, and the brave women of Iran are like, you know, they're heroes, and like, and they fought for Majid. So, and you can see Azine up here at the very top middle, and that's the print with his mother. And there was just like hundreds and hundreds of these images that just started circulating all around. And to me, it was just like this absolutely moving gesture of genuine solidarity and vulnerability on the part of these men standing with women and with feminism. And you can see these women saying, you know, I've never been so proud to be an Iranian woman. Like, you guys are my heroes. And it is just extremely, you know, it's extremely moving. So this is the final portrait of Azine that I made.
Yes, well, I imagine the intent is to humiliate the man, and you've just shown these many examples of support that that they received, and that this kind of solidarity, which is maybe unexpected and certainly very powerful. So we've been talking about the gendering of the image. And so I want to kind of turn that around we've looked at how you have changed the way these men can be represented. So I want to turn around by asking about gendered responses to the images. Have you found that the models themselves were interested in seeing the final product? How did they react? And then what has your experience been showing your work around and assessing how men and women might or might not react differently to your work?
Mm-hmm. I think that it really depended on the model, how they felt about the work. I think all of them thought they were objectively, well executed, strong photographs. But I think the vulnerability was very challenging for some of the male models. I immediately gave, the selections to all of the models. But I noticed that, most of them didn't use them in their profile pictures and in their new modeling portfolio updates that they did. And I think that that has to do with the punishment and the lack of, career options for more complex representations of gender and masculinity. One model, I remember like a turning point in our conversation during the shoot when, because all of them were very, easygoing about like, I'm down for whatever, put makeup on me, put this lacy thing on me, put this on me, that's fine. But the second the shoot was done, they were very, very careful to get all that makeup off, even just the littlest bit of, it's very subtle, the makeup, like just a little bit of blush, tiny bit of lip gloss and some powder, but they understood the danger of walking down the street, leaving my Brooklyn studio and potentially, getting jumped on their way home. And so that was an interesting reaction. And then in terms of like the gendered responses, I think it's both gendered and it's also, sexuality. So on the one hand, the first audience that always embraced this work was queer people, and especially in Europe. I had a much stronger, I showed it first at the Kunstsalvin in Vienna, and then I showed it in Europe like much more than I showed it in the US at first. And then at first it was just only in queer institutions if it was in the US. And over time there was more interest from some non-queer people, I guess. And I think that there was, there have always been some audiences of, straight identified men who said like, thank you for showing this part, because I think it felt like a way of being seen, like a part of themselves that isn't allowed to be seen, that was being able to be shown. And, but I think, I think something that queer artists can offer, and thinkers and, scholars and writers, et cetera, is just a real way of questioning, like the opportunity to question this construct of gender that is treated as a fact and is treated as a norm, and just to kind of open it up and say like, wow, like this is not the truth of who we possibly are. This is not everything. This can't possibly represent all of this incredible, ineffable, complex, dynamic energy that's inside of us. And whatever language we have, it's always going to be way, way, way insufficient for what we are. And I think that's a real gift that I think queer artists can hopefully share.
Yes, well, we've been talking about Azine, and then all these other pictures of the models you've taken. And it makes me wonder to what extent these pictures are also a self-portrait. Are they cumulatively a portrait of Sophia?
Yeah, I really love, and also I'm like very afraid of this question. I I would have never said, yeah, it's a self-portrait. I'd be like, no, I'm looking at masculinity through femininity and this construct and unpacking it. But I think over time, what I started to think about is the ways that in my own embodiment, being feminized and being treated as beautiful when I was little sometimes became extremely dangerous for me as a girl. I remember being whistled at by men when I was like 6 years old playing in my front yard. I remember getting in trouble for walking from the shower to my room while I'm wearing, you know, a towel, because what if someone sees? I remember getting, you know, just countless times being followed or being harassed. And this feeling of incredible vulnerability and danger, this feeling that because of being desired in a certain way, that my body wasn't really safe and that my body wasn't really mine. And then there's things like, you know, being told, and, you know, from the time you're a little girl, close your legs, don't sit like that. You know, doing Greek dancing, where we had to, the girls' roles in Greek dancing, in traditional Greek dancing, you can't kick your legs high, you know, and all the fun dances. I mean, to me anyway, I wanted to kick high and jump around, and I love the boys' dances. I mean, some of you guys have seen them, and, you know, they're kicking and they're jumping and they're balancing things on their head. And that's what I wanted to do. I tried to dress up in drag and be able to do the boys' part. And the dance teacher told me, like, absolutely not. And so I think there was something really satisfying about trying to see if I could talk about this in someone else's body. But at the same time, as I did that, I really kind of fell in love with all my subjects. And it wasn't like trying to do like a gotcha thing, like, oh, let me do this to you, haha, I've got you. It was more like, let me show this beautiful part of you that you're not really allowed to let people see, except for, you know, maybe your family and like your partners. And let me like hold that in space and shine the light to it and kind of protect it and honor it. And it also, you know, and one more level of it too is just like, as a lesbian and as someone who has dealt with a fair amount of like sexual harassment my whole life, there was something really special about being able to look at men in terms of their beauty and look at them as these incredible aesthetic creatures, but it wasn't sexual, you know, and I wasn't trying to get anything from them. And they knew that I wasn't, there was no like sexual predation. And it was like safe for me to look at them without being worried, oh no, if I compliment this man and tell him that he's beautiful, he's going to think I'm trying to hit on him and I'm going to have like a problem on my hands. It was sort of a safe way for me to like look at men and in the positionality of my own body, you know? And so that was an unexpected kind of liberating aspect of it.
Yes, well, the images are very beautiful. This is, of course, just an introduction to your work. They're very beautiful. The models themselves are very beautiful. And yet, when we look at them, no matter how diverse each model is and how different each photograph is from the other, we can tell it's a Sophia Wallace. I mean, when we look at that, we're not going to mix it up with somebody else. I think it has a strong imprint of your sensibility and your intellect on it. And it's in that sense that I felt that there is a controlling personality here, which unites them and which gives them the imprint of you. So I look at them as double portraits in a way. It's a portrait of this person where you're bringing out something in him that maybe even he himself didn't expect. But at the same time, I felt it was a type of self-portrait because you're able to create this in all of your models. But as I said, this is just an introduction, and I want to open it up to the participants. We've got Sophia Wallace live from Brooklyn and willing and able to answer your questions. So is Stefano currently host, or can you switch it back to Stefano at this point?
No, deve togliere Sofia.
Oh, okay. So Sophia, if you can remove yourself as host and make it Stefano, we can start taking questions from our audience. Thank you very much. And while we're doing that, let me just also remind everybody that this is an ongoing series, and next Saturday, same time, same channel, as I used to say, we're going to have our third interview with a team of partners in life and in art, Lori Nix and Kathleen Gerber, who'll be talking about their work, The City, which is a fabulous body of work. So please join us then. At this point, I think we're ready to take questions.
I'm going to just jump in there. Hi. I think this is such an amazing body of work. Ciao tutti. And it feels like a really important body of work to me, having been in a very similar position of having to make a living as a commercial photographer, but mostly shooting men, interestingly. And I know that you both sort of discussed this in the interview, but I was wondering if you could feel the actual, I know these are professional models, and so, you know, they're very good at like getting into poses, but I was just wondering if there were any moments where you can actually feel a discomfort in them posing in these feminine ways, and if you feel like there are any images that actually reveal this moment.
Oh yeah, I mean, thank you for this question, Liz. There was a lot of uncomfortable moments in terms of awkwardness, I would say, and a sense of like, this is not how I want to be seen, and I'm very exposed, and I'm not looking the way that I want to look, and I'm not used to my body being treated in this way. I'm not used to being forced to make it small and make it bent over and part my lips and look down and then up, and so there was certainly for some of them some discomfort, and I tried to make them feel safe, because where I'm coming from is like a genuine place of like reverence and care. It's not to humiliate anybody. But I think, you know, the fact that like many of them didn't want to use any of these images in their portfolio, I think that kind of says a lot.
Yeah, I could see that being really creating a sort of discomfort in you as a photographer, especially as a female photographer in this position, and you know, being considerate. Anyway, thank you for answering that.
I think people can just jump in. Oh, Natalia, you raised your hand.
Yes, it was really interesting because like in my graduate studies in philosophy, I did a course on 1,000 Plateaus by Gilles Deleuze, and it always says that any becoming is always minoritarian. So putting them in that minoritarian position, you're kind of empowering them to become something else, because first you have to become an animal, a female, a child, and then kind of the collective consciousness can change, because it can't be changed from the male gaze standpoint of view. But if you assume this position, so was it somewhere like at the back of your mind when you were creating these portraits?
I love that reference. Not exactly in that way, but I think I was reading a lot of Judith Butler and Foucault, and I was thinking about how do I show this construct, and how do I break this the safety, you know, part of why I had the video and the photographs is because the photographs are so clean and they feel so true, even though we all know that like photographs are constructs, like it's almost impossible to not look at the photograph and say, oh, that's who that person is. So I wanted the video to show the violence of me stripping them of their voices and me forcing them into this place of emotionality where I'm like asking them these really personal questions and they're just forced to like think and feel. And they never get to speak. They just get to emote and have affect. And so I think in ways that it was successful in that it gave them, some of them, hopefully a space to feel like a new part of themselves. Not even, I don't want to be arrogant and say new, but a part of themselves that's not allowed to normally be seen or be celebrated, to be held by that light and by that film. I hope, and I think for some of them it was like a special experience, and I'm still in touch with some of them. And then I think with other ones, it was like, kind of like someone invites you to therapy and you don't want to go or something. They're like, no, thank you.
Yeah, it was very powerful, the part of the video, because even like the smallest of the musculature movements on the face and some of them just swallowing, you could see that it evoked like strong responses that they probably wouldn't be able to verbalize at that point, but it is powerful for the viewer to watch it. It's very, very subtle, but at the same time, in its subtlety, has a very powerful impact.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, before we go to the next question, please feel free to start your video so we can see you. I think it was disabled before, but if you want to, you're most welcome to.
Are we allowed to just jump in?
Please do, yes.
Hello, my name's Nick. Thank you so much, Sophia, for this opportunity for all of us to hear you speak and talk about your work. I'm curious about two things, if that's all right. One of them was a question you were asked about where you see yourself almost as like a self-portrait through your subjects, kind of like using them as surrogates. And I'm just curious if you've been asked that question before. I've been asked that question before in my work as a femme-appearing queer artist, but I've never heard my male cohorts asked that question. And then also curious about how you found success moving your work from a queer audience and platform to a more mainstream audience to bridge that connection.
Yeah, thank you for these questions. I don't think anyone's ever asked me the question that Bill asked me. And when he asked me, and he was, you know, kind enough to tell me in advance, okay, these are the questions I think I want to ask you. So I had time to think about it, but I was like, my first response was like, oh, what a like really far away question. Like, I really have to think about that one. Like, that's no. But then of course I was like, oh, actually, yeah. And what he said at the end about them being all from the same sort of consciousness and feeling, I mean, I started to like really understand that sentiment. So in a way, you know, it probably is something that really needs to be asked to, you know, the Richard Princes and the Jeff Koons of the world. But I like that I was asked because for me, you know, I've always been drawn to portraiture in my photographic work because I love people so much, and that opportunity to connect and to be in that emotional space and to show, especially things that like others aren't seeing about someone that they so deserve to be celebrated for. I love that opportunity. I feel like it's an incredible gift. And so after so long, you know, aestheticizing butchness and androgyny, I was really excited to show this softness and gentleness and dare I say, you know, receptivity and passiveness of men, and be like, this is beautiful, or men being doubtful, or men being, you know, unclear or ditzy, or, you know, just these things that are so, these emotions that are so neutral, but are always gendered feminine. It was like such a pleasure. But I think at the end, even though I had my intellectual plan, you know, you still end up kind of creating a self-portrait in a way. So that's a surprise to me, but probably true. And then the second part of your question, moving from queer audiences to, you know, majoritarian audiences, I don't even know that I don't know when that begins or ends, or if that's really happened, but I guess because I started doing a project that was about the way that certain bodies are denied pleasure, and those bodies, you know, that basically, just to put it in a nutshell, you know, the people that are having the least orgasms in the world are heterosexual women. And why is that? And because I was talking about that experience, and particularly talking about it as a queer person, and with the knowledge and the freedom and also the otherness that allows me to speak openly, because I feel like I'm already othered, I can tell the truth about this. I think because I was talking about this thing that you're never supposed to say, it really did open up a lot of new audiences. And in some ways I was scared that I would lose the intimacy of queer audiences, because they would be like, well, duh, Sophia, of course, you know. But sometimes, you know, we have to share the insight that we have. And we have to like speak a truth that needs to be said. And for me, you know, that truth was like unbearably unstated in my experience. And so I just needed, and I felt like I couldn't avoid, like I tried to pass off talking about it, but it got to the point where I was like, I literally had no choice. Like I had to do it. And so that's sort of how it happened. But you know, if you look at my CV, all my shows are like the queer blah, 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 the feminist blah, 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 like everything. So I'm still in there.
I want to just bring up something that we've got an audience from everywhere. Liz Lagori, who asked a question, our first speaker last week, is speaking to us from upstate New York. Natalia is in New York City, I think, at this moment. Are you in Washington?
No, I'm in Maryland right now.
Maryland. And originally from Russia, I think. Yes. But now serving her time as a top-notch spy in the United States. And Nick, where are you speaking from?
I'm also in Maryland, close to Washington, D.C.
Oh, okay. Well, I think it might be fun when people are asking their questions to tell us where they're speaking from. So let's move on to our next question.
Yo, just beware, I'm back in New York City, so watch out.
Oh, okay, good.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sophia, for this introduction to your work, which is really an introduction for me. So I ended up here randomly, and this was, wow. I'm based in Berlin, so I recognize the little connection there as well. I don't know if I have a good question, but there's something about like the past and kind of a future state that I'm curious about, and your thinking when it comes to the expression of one's, the expression that we have in our body, and how we, how we kind of represent ourselves and express ourselves. What is your thinking when it comes to like protesting the past or protesting the present? Way that people are represented and gender is represented, whereas like changing it into something that feels different and maybe more real in a way. And so, yeah.
Oh, this is like such a good question, and I wish we could like sit down with coffee and talk about it for hours, but I would say I think I'm learning all the time, and I'm changing all the time, and I have been changing. You know, I came out when I was 16, and I looked very like butch presenting. I have the evidence to prove it. I have lots of pictures of me with short hair and like sports bras and baggy clothes, and then I became much more feminine, and then, you know, what happened to me recently, which was completely crazy and the most insane gendered experience of my life, is that I got pregnant and had a baby. And that was like the most dysphoric bodied experience I've ever had, where I just felt like suddenly in this positionality as like a mother and everything that went along with that. And I felt like my subjectivity and me as who I am as this person wasn't seen. I didn't have the language for what I was anymore. And I think like when I think about terms like cis versus trans, or you know, non-binary, agender, I feel so excited by the options that people are creating, the spaces people are carving out, and I still don't really see where I fit exactly. Like you know, like I spent an hour doing my hair and makeup this morning, like stuck in performing the, you know, the rules of femininity, and I can do that well, but like inside, I definitely wish there was a name like that had to do with, that included my queerness, that included my feminism, that included my the way that I feel about my body and my partner's body. And I don't know what those words would be, what that language would be. So I feel like very hopeful about the ways that a lot of trans and non-binary people are really pushing things forward and thinking about these things, because they're helping all of us have new possibilities, new language, and just like a little bit of breathing space, you know, just to be who we are. Like I just learned about this insane creature, you guys. I posted it on my Twitter. It's on there. I got no responses, but this creature is incredible. And it's called a something vagina, but it's basically this multi-gender, multi-sexed sea creature that has like a shape like a tube, and it reproduces by making a bunch of little clones of itself. And then those clones create embryos, and then it makes more clones, and then those clones make testes and then make sperm. And then those sperms fertilize those embryos, and then more are made. So like it's a clone, it's totally autonomous. It's also both sexes. It's also like, we don't even know. And when I think about these possibilities of what exists in nature, it's so much more than we've ever been taught. It's obviously beyond a binary, and it's obviously beyond, you know, a non-binary. It's like so much more. So I guess to me, it's about, you know, queer futurity, but I'm following. I don't think I'm leading at all. I'm just a human being trying to like figure it out, you know?
Thank you.
Anybody wants to jump in, so you don't have to be called on.
Bill, is it okay if I jump in with a question?
Oh, except for you. That sounds like, is that Paul?
It is. Hi.
From Denver.
From Denver.
Oh, so nice to see you. Please.
Very nice to see you too. So I think my question, I've been thinking about it, but it keys off of what you had just said, Sophia, about your journey. And as I looked at the slideshow, I think the pictures I respond to all of them, but I think the ones I responded to the most were not the final Harvard admission class pictures, but the pictures that showed, and maybe it was a collage just for this presentation, but that showed the continuum of representation of the individuals as they got to the final image. I really liked the a picture perhaps as they came into the studio and as they went through the discomfort of responding to your direction, and then to the final state where you had the narrative that you wanted. And I was wondering about your thoughts for having a show or more finished work of that continuum, because that continuum represents to me what a lot of us to different degrees go through in our own daily lives about how we represent ourselves.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I appreciate you asking that. And it also makes me think of Liz's question. And I have to say, you know, it was such a privilege to be asked to even share this work, because, you know, it's about 10 years old and I haven't looked at it in a long time. And I forgot about how many images there were. I had to dig in my archives and I suddenly found all the film. And I was like, oh, wow, this is, maybe these parts are more interesting than some of these other parts that I thought were the pictures, you know? So I would be very interested and curious and excited to explore a little bit more deeply, and the me now that's trying to be a little bit more more raw and more vulnerable. I think I could always work on that. I'm such a perfectionist type where I just am afraid to show all of my mistakes, but I think actually sometimes the mistakes are the more true parts. So yeah, it turns out I have these thousands of images, and it is interesting to see that journey and to see that the unfolding, and to see the forcing of this onto this person and what happens with that pressure.
We do have, we have time for more questions. And as I look out on these smiling faces, I recognize friends and some people who are new to me also from, let's see, we've got Italy, and let's see, Canada, Germany, United States, California. I don't know if that's a separate country. Other people from all over the world. It's really wonderful to see. And I think in addition to this international aspect of, you know, bringing people in from all over the world, also this question of queer versus straight that we were talking about. And I think that when your work is personal like this and it's so reflective, it opens up a window to everybody. So I don't think it gets pigeonholed into one little place. It's just as expansive as our audience is. But I'd rather hear from somebody else.
Well, I'll make a comment. It's not really a question. Beautiful work, by the way. When I look at the pictures, I like the way you captured the vulnerability of the men. And I think that exists with everybody. And perhaps the problem in photography is we don't show the masculinity in women, because we have that too. And I think that would be a very interesting comparison, because, well, I'm an Aries and I'm a very feminine woman, but I'm also a very male. I have a lot of male energy, and I don't want to be, that's part of who I am. And that would be fun to see in photos of me if I ever posed one day. I just think it's interesting. Also, here, when you talk about putting categories in people or labels, I'd really like the description of that strange animal that you described, because I think humans are actually closer to nature than we allow ourselves to be. And if I can recommend a book, by the way, where she talks about this, is Where the Crawdad Sings. If any of you have read it, she refers to beauty and how at the same time it gives you power in the world, but you're extremely vulnerable because other predators think they own you. And that describes very well what you were talking. Or even if I walk down the street, or even on social media, I have my picture and I have all these men coming at me like they all want to marry me or want to go off with me. And so I have to change my, that type of thing. So I think that was interesting about the vulnerability. It's too bad that we don't show men with more vulnerability. the problem, the question that I was started asking myself was like, were all these men gay? And I don't want to have to ask my question that. Because I don't think just because you're vulnerable doesn't mean that you prefer somebody of the same sex. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I was, when I was looking at the images, I wasn't thinking, oh, is he gay? And then after a while, I was like, oh, maybe he is. And I didn't want to ask that question. I don't want to have to ask that question. It shouldn't have to be relevant to me.
Totally.
I like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, this makes complete sense. I have explored female masculinity, and I would love to explore it more. And I would love to shoot a portrait of you showing your strength. I think that'd be great. In terms of thinking about the sexuality of the subject, I mean, that was something that was so interesting, was because the second that you break the perfection of the rules of masculinity, like you break these unspoken codes, immediately they become presumed to be gay, and they're posing seemingly to get the attention of a dominant gay man, seemingly, and a lot of people just assumed that these pictures were facts of who they were and that they were all gay men, and no, not at all, and that's what's so funny, because you see how fragile masculinity is. Like, you just break some of the rules and like, oh no, it's not real anymore. It's like, so you're exactly on it. And that, I think, is part of what is, even doing it so subtly, where it's not drag, it's just a tilt of a head. It's just like a tiny bit of lip gloss or something. And immediately it kind of went into that territory of like, you're an object for someone, and it's not women.
Yeah. Totally. Well, you captured that very well. Anyway, your models are beautiful.
Thank you. I think so.
Well,
yeah.
Catherine, you have a modeling job lined up now.
Hey, I'd love it.
And Catherine, you're speaking to us from?
Montreal.
Okay.
For now.
For now.
I want to leave the city.
Can I jump in and ask a question?
Of course, Bridget.
This is Bridget. I'm in Brooklyn. I have to disclose that I'm a friend of Sophia's, and I'm interested in jumping onto Bjorn's question and sort of like digging in more about how protest factors into your work. So somebody that's been more aware of and in close proximity to the work that you've been doing in the last 10 years, protest sometimes is very obvious in that work and sometimes very subtle in that work. And getting to see these photographs and getting to watch the video was a real pleasure today. But I'm curious about how you approach protest. I know that you innately are an activist, and that comes into your work in so many different ways. And when you look back at this series and the photographic work that you did prior to it, can you speak to your intent in terms of protest? I was regarding Bjorn's question as a sort of like, how can you enact change? Like, you can protest, but can you be effective? Does it make sense to protest what is happening, or does it make more sense to change in the way that you can and like move forward? That's what I took away from their question. And I was curious about, like, when you think about your work, my impression is that one of your objectives is change, is reframing the way that we see things and shifting mindsets and whatnot. So can you speak about that?
I can't deny it. I mean, you know me, Bridget, so I cannot. I think all work has an agenda, but I think mine absolutely does. My background actually is in political science before art, so that's what I studied in undergrad, but I also did a lot of activism in high school. And I do protest and I do participate in political work, but I think my work now is much more, I think of myself as an artist, but my work is trying to create more space for our shared humanity. I mean, I know that's like a big, very, maybe really naive thing to say, but that's really what I want my work to do. And I mean, if we just look at the Black Lives Matter movement in this country, the change that it has achieved specifically, I mean, it's been going on for a very long time, but in the last year has been so incredible and so necessary and so long overdue. And I really believe in the power of people coming together and making the world better and keeping the world right where it needs to be. And when it not let it get taken over by business interests or power interests or whatever. So I definitely identify with the history of artists who are commenting on their times and are taking a position within their time and are making work that they hope can be both enjoyed aesthetically, but also useful.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me add, this is Bill again, that after the experience in this country of the past 4 years, you've got your work cut out for you. A lot of, I think we have time for, well, we're joined by somebody in Italy here, who's popping on and off the screen. We do have time for more questions. If anybody like to just jump in?
Can I just say 2 things? And then also we can also go, because I really appreciate your guys' time and attention and also sharing your faces and your wonderful questions with me. But 2 things that I want to share that I haven't shared yet. One is the titles of the series. I named the pieces based on attributes that are extremely gendered, and they're aesthetic attributes or emotional attributes, but they're highly gendered. So I called them words like modesty, vanity, purity, chastity, et cetera, to try to, again, kind of drive home these ideas of gendered bodies and beauty, and what would happen, like would a beautiful man be put into the virgin whore paradigm, for example? Like, would that happen, or would his masculinity in a way protect him from that? So that's just one other detail. And then the last thing I want to say is that it's really interesting in terms of thinking about futures of, like, now that I have a child and he's a boy, as far as I know right now, we'll find out, you know, when he can speak and identify more for us, but trying to bring these ideas of how to have safety and freedom and spaciousness within one's body, how to be able to listen to one's own body, and bring these ideas home to him. And that's been something that I recently made like a short film about this, about my dreams for his body. And it's just something that, you know, you think you've done your work and then you just continue, you know, peeling the onion, I guess, because there's just so much there. And that's been sort of an exciting new dimension to everything that makes me think about the past work, but also going forward.
Well, let me thank everybody for joining us today. I love your work, Sophia, and I love to hear you talk about it. It's very stimulating, just fills us all with ideas, and it was, I learned so much from you. And from all of these wonderful, stimulating questions from people. So it just made it so invigorating and inspiring. Thank you very much. And as a reminder, please do join us next week when I'll be speaking with 2 photographers who've been working together for a number of years, Lori Nix and Kathleen Gerber, and they are just wonderful. Everybody in the series is wonderful. And I think if you follow us from one interview to the next, you'll see that each of these women is producing work which is, oh my God, look at that. I was talking and talking, the baby steals the show. Oh, the whole family, oh my God. And the doggy, everything. So please join. Well, we'll get the dog. We'll definitely get the dog and baby joining us. So please join us next time. All the women are producing very different work, and then also I want to give a plug to Stefano's series of VA culture. In Italian, it's called Vua Culture. And this is a series which is free and covers a whole range of topics, the visual arts, but also philosophy, politics, religion, and so forth. And a lot of them are in Italian. And now we're also coming in with English language presentations. Let's see your baby again.
Oh, bring him back. I also want to show you guys Zane and his mom in case, because I just love this portrait so much. It's so sweet. So you guys, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.
Join us next week and tell your friends to come. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye. We have the mask in this time.
Okay, thanks for coming, everybody.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Nice interview, Bill.
I have a question really quick. Where do I got invited to this randomly. How do I find you? Like what? I don't even know what this is. My name is Jenny Jenkins. I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio. But I want to be able to come back.
Jenny, if you give me your, I think chat is disabled. You
can just tell me the online, if I can find you online somewhere that I can follow and come back and.
Well, let me see. There's also the VA site. Would you like to? I'll give you my. I'll give everybody, if they want, my my email, and if you write me, I'll send you the press release. Is that good?
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, so my email is. I don't think I can write it in chat. My email is WJ_Travis, all in one word, WJ_Travis, so initials WJ_TRAVIS,
okay,
at yahoo.com. And just let me know that you'd like to get the press release. That would probably be the easiest way to do it. If for some reason that doesn't go through on Facebook, there is the site of, I believe you could look up VA culture. That would go to Stefano. And that's the second option if the first one doesn't go through.
Perfect.
Yes, and tell your friends.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jenny.
Take care.